ILTV Plus, your news from Israel and more 24/7. Start your free trial today. Subscribe at iltv.tv and watch from any device. Our headline tonight, the holiest place in Judaism and amongst the holiest places in Christianity and Islam, cynically stripped of its history and importance as the United Nations General Assembly approves a new slew of anti-Israel resolutions. Among them, a resolution on the Temple Mount referred to only by its Muslim name, Al-Haram Al-Sharif, which disavowed Jewish and Christian ties to the site. And again, this just one of the dozen or so UN resolutions targeting Israel and Israel alone for sharp criticisms, as opposed to a total of 5 for the rest of the world this year combined. Joining me to discuss, managing editor of UN Watch, Simon Plosker. Simon, thank you so much for joining us. Now, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, these are all Abrahamic faiths. Nobody's arguing that. And so by logic alone, we can infer that the Temple Mount is important to all three peoples. Similarly, the resolutions condemning Israel for allegedly limiting freedom of religion and access to holy sites, another easily disproven claim. In fact, under Jordanian rule, Jewish sites and artifacts were destroyed, and Jews were barred from entry into Jerusalem, while free expression under Israeli law is guaranteed. Why then are such obvious facts so difficult for the UN to admit?
Well, I think unfortunately your question works on the assumption that obvious facts matter to the UN. You've got to remember that the UN is a political body. It's not really interested in the facts, but in advancing the political agendas of its member states. Now, you could refer to the UN as a single institution, but it's comprised of 193 separate member states. So when it comes to resolutions adopted by the General Assembly, these are nothing more than political declarations of the UN member states. And it's not really about the facts at all. Now, of course, when it comes to Israel, the UN is at ground zero in the delegitimization campaign against the Jewish state. And erasing the Jewish connection to its holiest site is at the heart of this campaign.
So, all right, now, as I said, I believe there were 20 UNGA resolutions this year, 14 of which is 70%, targeting Israel for admonition. Tell me about some of the other standout resolutions that passed recently or are expected to pass. You know, who's sponsoring them, who's voting for and against them, etc.
Right, well, we had 3 resolutions passed yesterday, including the one on Jerusalem. Another one included one on the Syrian Golan Heights. I say the Syrian Golan Heights, of course, it is under Israeli control. And many of these resolutions are sponsored by Arab and Muslim states for obvious reasons. Some are also co-sponsored by some of the worst human rights abusers in the UN, such as Cuba, Venezuela, North Korea. And there's going to be a whole batch of new resolutions that are going to be passed on December the 9th, I believe. And this is all part of an annual sort of Israel bashing ritual at the United Nations. Now, ultimately, I'm sorry to say that all of these resolutions are going to pass thanks to the built-in anti-Israel majority within the General Assembly. Now, unfortunately, there are only a few states, such as the US, Canada, Australia, and some US allied Southern Pacific islands, that will consistently side with Israel and vote against these one-sided resolutions. Now, for many of the countries that may not have a particular interest in these issues, there's very little cost for voting against Israel. But it may just come in handy if you want to support, the support of various blocs within the UN, such as the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the Arab League, the Non-Aligned Movement, and other states that might use the Israel issue as a means to distract from their own human rights abuses.
All right, well, there has been an apparent change in voting patterns, at least a little bit since 2018. More and more countries abstaining from voting, including the United Kingdom, which was, arguably a big statement. What do you make of this supposed trend?
Well, actually, we created a database at UN Watch of these UN resolutions, and it can be found at unwatch.org/database. And it actually shows that the UN's disproportionate focus on Israel and what other countries are being condemned by different UN bodies. Now, as part of this, we've also launched petitions for each country where people can lobby their governments to change their votes on these Israel resolutions. Now, as you pointed out, our work is paying off. Some of these countries have begun to change their votes. And this is a result of lobbying by individuals within each country. But it's based on our data showing how the UN singles out Israel and treats it differently from all other countries. Now, what's interesting, as you mentioned, there are only expected to be 14 resolutions on Israel this year. Now, I say only, it's a large amount, but this is actually down from 17 last year and 19 or 20 in the past. So because this is because the Palestinians are now beginning to understand that they are losing support and they're being pressured by the European Union and others, so they combined some of these resolutions together. Some of these resolutions are now biannual. So although the number of resolutions is actually going down, it's still highly disproportionate. And unfortunately, the European Union is still supporting most of them. Now, you mentioned the UK before. I think it's only fair to make it clear that the UK said it would have voted in favour of the Jerusalem resolution if it hadn't been for the Temple Mount issue. Now, the British ambassador even stated that even though the UK abstained, this didn't actually reflect any policy change towards Jerusalem. And of course, the UK, like many other countries, doesn't recognise Jerusalem as a united city under Israeli sovereignty. So we're making progress. There's a long way to go. And really, one of the things that we focus on is trying to change the votes of the democracies within the United Nations, because that to us is important.
All right, Simon Plosker, thank you so much for joining us again today.
Thank you.